Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss conservation of forest. Okay. As in previous class, we have to discuss about natural resources and the conservation of overall all the resources. Okay. And the today discussion focus on the conservation of natural resources in reference to forest resources. Okay. These are the objective of today's discussion to study various method of conservation of forest and student able to understand after completion of discussion about conservation of forest and various method that could be used for the conservation of forest and what are the causes of deforestation and control measure of deforestation. Okay. So, what are the measures that could be used for the conservation of forest? Okay, regulated and planned cutting of tree. Okay, as we know that the deforestation is the major cause of destruction of forest. Okay, so that's why it is very necessary to the plant cutting of trees is to be there. Okay, so that over harvesting to be checked and control over forest fire. Okay, as we know that the forest fire is a natural phenomena. Okay, and the natural calamites. Okay, but it could degrade a large area of the forest. Okay, so it must control. Okay, so that the forest fire it cannot much impact on the forest and deforestation program has to be initiated and afforestation program also has to be initiated and check on forest clearance for agriculture. Okay, so it has to be observed that the forest land has to be converted into the agriculture. Okay, and it could be used for the for the agriculture purpose. Okay, and the human habitation. Okay, so it also has been observed that the forest area has to be converted into the housing project. Okay, and development green belt around cities and check on mining activity in the forest area. Okay, as at this point, even we have to discuss in the previous lecture that the mining activity also affect the forest. Okay, how it affect because after the mining, the mining dust, carbon dust deposited on the leaves. Okay, and the photosynthesis efficiency of the leaves has to be decreased. Okay, this ultimately affect the forest sustainability. Okay, and leaves has to be degraded. Okay, ultimately the plant which stand over there has to be degraded. Okay, and that's why the check on the stop on the mining activity in the forest area and protection of existing forest. Okay, it is very much very essential point because the forest take many years to develop. Okay, it is not there. We have to plant tree today and it develop within a few months, a few years. Okay, it takes hundreds of years to develop fully. Okay, that's why the existing forest has to be protected and conservation of threatened species of tree. Okay, and social forestry and agroforestry has to be initiated. Okay, in which along with the forest, the agriculture can be the forest land without harming the forest can try to convert into the agriculture land. Okay, and development of national parks and sanctuaries and development of botanical garden and development of seed bank and forest management and proper role of government in the forest conservation. Okay, so what is the deforestation? It is very much clear that it means reckless or large scale felling or cutting of trees by men for commercial uses for industrial purposes. Okay, and the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN define the changes of forest with the depletion of the tree crown cover more than 90%. Okay, so that's why it is a very devastating process by which the forest has to be degraded. And what are the major cause of forestation, so that we can work on to protect our forest, or work on the conservation of forest and sustainable utilization of forest. So the cause of deforestation include desertification. Okay, so you cannot say that they always the cutting of tree is dangerous. Okay, but cutting if a tree is dangerous, but in addition to the desertification has many desertification of soil can be carried by the many ways. Okay, like excessive use of pesticides, excessive use of fertilizer. Okay, and the overgrazing of cattle. Okay, and drought. And floods. Okay, so these are the major reason in by which the soil convert into the uh, barren land. Okay, which that soil cannot support any plant community, and soil degradation and soil erosion is another major cause of deforestation, and loss of vegetation cover, destruction of natural habitat, and loss of wildlife. Okay, and changes in climatic condition. It is another cause. Okay, so ultimately, some of the cause are direct cause, some of the cause are indirect cause. Okay, but ultimately the forest has to be degraded, and the environmental pollution also affect forest. Okay, and major cause of deforestation and damage to the ecosystem. Okay, and reduction in the soil moisture. Okay, so these are the causes of deforestation. So how we can control the deforestation? So the prevention of human settlement in the forest area, and check on expansion of agriculture into the forest land, and provision of setting up of the agriculture into forest land, and check on reckless cutting of trees. Okay, and control mining in the forest area, and check on construction of a large dam in a forest area. Okay, is the many volunteer has to be discussed that in place of a large dam, the small dam is essential. Okay, so a small dam prepare in place of a large dam. Okay, and control on overgrazing in the forest area. Okay, and what are the uses of forest resources? So uses of they stop the rain bearing winds and cause the rainfall. Okay, and they increase the moisture content in the atmosphere, and thereby provide additional precipitation, as it is universal concept that forests attract rain. Okay, and they minimize the extreme variation in climatic condition and make the climate more equable, and they control floods during heavy rain by absorbing excess rainwater, and they prevent soil erosion by checking the force of flowing of water, and the thick root of the tree absorb large quantity of water. Okay, thus prevent the heavy flow. Okay, which is the cause of remove fertile soil from the topsoil. Okay, now some other uses, like they offer hunting ground. Okay, for the many wild animals, and they provide shelter to wild animal as well birds, and which is essential part of the provide stability to the ecosystem, and they improve the sanitary condition of a place, and they are source of revenue to the government, and in addition to they facilitate human existence by providing oxygen to human beings and absorbing carbon dioxide by human beings, and they provide employment to a large number of people in different capacities involved, okay, in the purposes of industrialization and utilization of forest and their products, and they also provide us herbal medicines, okay, and there are so many medicinal plants naturally found in the forest area, and what are the reasons for the large scale depletion of forest. So the expansion of agriculture, more forests have been cleared for agriculture, okay, which is the major cause of large scale depletion of forest, and a large area of forest land have been cleared for urbanization in the name of development, and housing project for human settlement, and commercial exploitation of forest, and forest fire also affect and deplete forest cover, and mining activity in the forest area, and forest disease are also partially responsible for depletion of forest, and what are the adverse effect of depletion of tree. Okay, so because it provide moisture to the environment, so if the depletion of forest is there, so it has contributed to the rise in the temperature, okay, because the forest absorb carbon dioxide, which is the major greenhouse gases, okay, so when the forest has to be depleted, the carbon dioxide in the environment has to be increased, okay, and the forest also control the local temperature, okay, and because the transpiration process of the forest, okay, maintain the moisture in the environment, okay, that's why if depletion of tree is there, so the rise in temperature is there, and it has contributed to the major precipitation because forest attract rain, and it is responsible for increased rate of soil erosion because the forest and the roots of trees bind the soil particles, and it is responsible for increase in the frequency and volume of floods because the forest can absorb large quantity of water and prevent the heavy flow of on over the surface, and it leads to loss of soil productivity. Obviously, when the soil has to be uppermost soil has to be removed, it loses the soil fertility, and which affect the soil productivity. It is responsible for loss of biodiversity, and it has leads to extinction of several species of plants and animals, and it has caused imbalance in the ecosystem. Okay, and what are the way by which we can conserve forest resources? Okay, so, as we have to discuss here, the regulated and planned cutting of trees must be there. Control over forest fire, deforestation, afforestation. Okay, check on the forest clearance for agriculture and human habitation and settlement, development, green belt around cities. Check on mining activity in the forest area, protection of existing forest, and conservation of threatened species, and agroforestry, development of national park and sanctuaries, development of botanical garden, development of seed bank, forest management, and proper role of government in the forest conservation. Because the legislative rule is also essential for the conservation of forest, and deforestation, as we have to discuss here, it is reckless or large scale felling or cutting of trees by means for commercial and other purposes. Okay, so this point we already discussed. Control of deforestation, I think this point we already discussed. Now the importance of biodiversity, okay, because the forest provide a large variations in the fauna, large variation in the flora, okay, so it contribute to the biodiversity, okay, And what is the importance of biodiversity? Because biodiversity is the very basis of human survival and economic development, as it provides food, housing, clothing, medicine, and industrial raw materials. And a wide range of industrial material are directly obtained from biological resources, okay, like rubber, oil, fiber, building material, timber, paper, all are obtained from biological resources. And 80% of the world population depend on medicine that obtained from the nature. Okay, and as we have to discuss here, a number of medicinal plant naturally found in the forest area. Okay, and what are the impact of loss of biodiversity, and what are the cause of loss of biodiversity. So the main cause of biodiversity loss are habitat destruction, invasive species. Okay, invasive species, the species which enter into a particular area from the another area. Okay, and which are dominant over the endemic species. Okay, and population expansion and over exploitation and climate change and introduction of exotic species. And okay, so these are the major cause of loss of biodiversity. And destruction of the habitat is the biggest threat to biodiversity. Okay, and as you know that the habitat destruction affect the food chain, food web. Okay, and habitat can also be damaged by the flooding, lack of water, drought, climate change, sanitation. Okay, so all these phenomena, which may be both natural and man-made, affect and loss contribute to the loss of biodiversity. And global warming affect plants, animals, and microorganisms, and both by changing their habitats and by direct effect of temperature. And climatic change also affect species at cellular level, and it can alter the genetic makeup of the cell. Okay, so these all are the causes, okay, that contribute to the loss of biodiversity. Okay, now how we can conserve this biodiversity. Okay, so these are the some ways by which we have to conserve biodiversity. So protecting the loss of biodiversity. Okay, both in situ and ex situ method of biodiversity conservation are equally important. Okay, and what is in situ conservation, what is ex situ conservation? Okay, then we have to conserve biodiversity at their natural place. Okay, this is called in situ conservation. And if we can conserve biodiversity and shift the flora and fauna to another place, another suitable place. Okay, so this is comes under the ex-situ conservation. Okay, and it is now recognized that ex-situ technique can be efficiently used to complement in-situ method, and they may represent the only option for conserving certain highly endangered and rare species. Okay, so it is very much important that ex-situ conservation for the highly endangered species which may be extinct in near future. Okay, can be prevented by the H2 conservation method. Okay, and preservation the habitat is the most important issue in the conservation of biodiversity, since chemical pesticides are responsible for a large number of animal deaths occurring every year. And minimizing the use of chemical pesticide is another technique for the survival of biodiversity. Okay, and conservation of biodiversity through establishment of a protected area. Okay, which is comes under the institute conservation, like uh, uh, convert a forest area into the national park, wildlife sanctuary, biosphere reserve, marine reserve. Okay, so these are the way in institute conservation which contribute to the conservation of biodiversity. And what is the role of biotechnology in plant conservation. Okay, so if we talk about the institute conservation, so the biosphere reserve, national park, tiger reserve, wildlife sanctuaries. Okay, so these ways used to conserve biodiversity. Okay, either plants, forest, or either animal or wild animal. And H2 consumption technique include development of botanical garden, okay, and development of experimental garden, and development of feed gene bank, and selection of superior germ plant, okay, and these germ plant can be stored in the germ plant bank or gene bank. These are the methods or H2 method for the conservation of biodiversity. And now, what is the protected area? So the protected area are constituted and governed under the provision of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, which has been amended from time to time, and with the changing ground reality concerning wildlife crime control and protected area management, and implementation of this act is further complemented by other act like Indian Forest Act 1972, okay, for the conservation of natural resources, Forest Conservation Act 1980, and Environmental Protection Act 1986, and Biological Diversity Act 2002, and the Scheduled Tribes and other traditional forest dwellers Act 2006. So, in order to strengthen and synergize global wildlife conservation effort, India is a member to major international convention, okay, like Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, and International Union for Conservation of Nature. Okay, India is member of that convention, and International Convention for the Regulation of Whaling, UNESCO World Heritage Committee, and Convention on Migratory Species. Okay, so these are the some major why which the biodiversity conservation has to be uh, initiated. Okay. And if we talk about the institute protected area, okay, so we have to discuss here these ways it comes under the institute conservation of biodiversity, okay, like convert area into the biosphere reserve or national park or tiger reserve, wildlife sanctuary, okay, and these names given on the basis of area covered under protection, okay. So the Biosphere Reserve of India, or some of the reserve like mentioned in this list. So the Indian government has established 18 biosphere reserve in India, which protect larger area of natural habitat than a national park or animal sanctuary, and often include one or more national park or preserved along a buffer zone that are open to some economical use. Okay, so these include Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. Okay, located in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and some part of Karnataka, established in 2000, and Gulf of Mannar Biosphere Reserve, located in Tamil Nadu, established in 2001, and Sundarban Biosphere Reserve, located in West Bengal, established in 2001, and Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve, located in Uttarakhand and established in 2004, and Noktek Biosphere Reserve, located in Meghalaya, established in 2009, and Panch Marhi Biosphere Reserve, located in Madhya Pradesh, established in 2009, and Simlipal Biosphere Reserve, located in Odisha, established in 2008. Okay, and Achanak Amar Karnataka Biosphere Reserve, located in Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and established in 2012, and Nicobar Island, okay, located in Andaman and Nicobar Island, and established in 2013. Okay, so these are the some major biosphere reserve of India, and the national park, okay, which also comes under the institute conservation. And a national park is a park in use for conservation purpose and conservation of biodiversity purpose, And national park is an area having adequate ecological, faunal, floral, and geomorphological, natural, and geological significance. And the national park is declared for the purpose of protecting, propagating, or developing wildlife or its environment. And although individual nations designate their own national park policy differently, and there is a common idea: the conservation of wild nature for posterity and as a symbol of national pride. And an international organization, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, that is IUCN, and its World Commission on Protected Area has defined national park as its category second type of protected area. And national parks are almost always open to visitor, and most national parks provide outdoor recreation and camping opportunity, as well as classes designed to educate the public on the importance of conservation of biodiversity and the natural wonder of the land in which the national park is located. And the comparison between the national park and wildlife sanctuary. So the national park, no right are allowed, and while in the wildlife sanctuary, certain rights can be allowed for the common people. And in the national park, no grazing of any livestock shall also be permitted inside a national park. Okay. While in the sanctuary, the chief wildlife warden may regulate, control, or prohibiting it. Okay. And while in addition from national park, required recommendation of the National Board for Wildlife, while any removal or exploitation of wildlife or forest produce from wildlife sanctuary require the recommendation of the State Board of for Wildlife. Okay. And in national park, rights of people living inside is maintained. Okay. And the tribal community can utilize the resources as ideal they can use. And wildlife sanctuary. So a wildlife a refuge, also called a wildlife sanctuary, is a naturally occurring sanctuary such as island that provide protection for species from hunting, from predation, from competition, and it is a protected area and a geographic territory which within which wildlife is protected. Okay, in their natural habitat. And IUCN category for protected area. Okay, so it comes under the IUCN category for protected area, like a national park comes under the second protected area. And such wildlife refuges are generally officially designated territory, and it is created by government legislation and publicly or privately owned sometime. And the Chernobyl nuclear accident site has accidentally become a wildlife refuge. Okay, and India has 515 animal sanctuaries, okay, or wildlife sanctuary, and among these, 41 tiger reserves are governed by the Project Tiger. And there are 47 tiger reserves in India. Okay, which are governed by the Project Tiger, which is administered by the National Tiger Conservation Authority. Okay. This is logo of National Tiger Conservation Authority. And now some point related to the X2 conservation. Okay, so the X2 conservation of plant genetic resource can be achieved through different methods. Okay, like gene sanctuaries that include seed bank and field gene bank, and in vitro storage method like pollen bank, DNA bank, germ plasm bank, and gene century. Okay, like so it to include the it has a genetic diversity is sometimes conserved under the natural habitat. Okay, so in other words, area of great genetic diversity are protected from human interference, and gene century is generally established in the center of diversity or micro center. And India has set up its first gene sanctuary in Garo Hills of Assam for wild relatives of citrus. and efforts are also being made to set up gene sanctuary for banana and sugarcane, rice, and mango. And what are the advantages of these gene sanctuary? So it protects the loss of genetic diversity caused by human intervention, and it allows natural selection and evolution to operate. And irrespective of advantage, there are some disadvantages also there, like entire variability of crop species cannot be conserved. Okay, and its maintenance and establishment is a difficult task in the gene sanctuary, and selection of superior germ plant. So it is another method for ex-situ conservation. And gene bank are also known as a germ plasm bank. And gene bank refer to a place or organization where germ plasm can be conserved in a living state. And germ plasm are stored in the form of seed, okay, and pollen storage, and in vitro culture, or in case of feed gene bank is plant growing in the field. And gene bank are mainly of two types, seed gene bank and field gene bank. Okay. So what is the seed gene bank? So a place where germplasm is conserved in the form of seed, okay, it's called simply seed bank. Seed gene bank. So seed are very convenient for storage because they occupy smaller space than whole plants, and they can be stored for long period of time. However, seed of all crops can not be stored at low temperature in the seed bank. So the gel plant of only option for this kind of species. So in the seed bank, there are three types of conservation: short-term conservation, and medium-term conservation, and long-term conservation. Okay, and base collection are conserved for long term, 50 years or more. Okay, so, at 18 or 20 degree. And active collection are stored for short term, at 5 to 10 degree. And seed gene bank, there are advantages there. So the large number of germ plant sample or entire variability can be conserved in very small space. And in seed bank, handling of germ plant is easy, and germ plant is conserved under pathogen and insect free environment. Okay, and there are some disadvantages of seed bank is there, like a seed of recalcitrant species cannot be stored in the seed bank. And failure of power supply may lead to the loss of viability and thereby loss of germ plant. And it requires a periodically evolution of seed viability. After some time, multiplication is essential to get new or fresh seed or storage. Okay, so it need some cost. And field gene bank. So the field gene bank or living collection are the main conservation strategy for long-lived perennials species and vegetative propagated species. And and furthermore, outbreeders require controlled pollination for regeneration from seed. And when displayed, the plant have an important educational value and can easily be assessed by research purposes. And field gene bank is one of the technique in the strategy for plant genetic conservation, and it is an ex-situ method where genetic variation is maintained away from its original location, and sample of a species, subspecies, or variety are transferred and conserved as a living collection. And field gene bank is the most common method for conserving genetic resources, genetic diversity with recalcitrant seed and vegetatively propagated plants. And another method or another ex-situ method is in vitro storage method. So the storage of germplasm in laboratory condition is especially suited for the long-term conservation of recalcitrant species and vegetatively propagated species, and they can be stored at low temperature under slow growth condition, or cryo preserved in liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degree. And cryopreservation has so far been successful with only a relatively few species, but it is a very promising development for long-term storage. And the main limitation of in vitro storage is the need for special equipment and technique and trained staff. However, more research is necessary to define the mechanism of desiccation, chilling injury, and investigate methods of alleviating it. And another way for X2 conservation is pollen bank. So pollen preservation may be useful for base collection of species that do not produce orthodox seeds, and it requires little space, but some cytoplasmic gene would be lost. And like seed, pollen can be divided into the desiccation tolerant and intolerant. So, however, information about storage characteristics of pollen from wild species is fragmentary, that existing mainly for some crop relative and for medicinal and forest species. So another way to access to conservation is DNA development of DNA bank, and the creation of a network of DNA bank is access to conservation, and more precisely, plant collection can allow large quantity of genetic resources to be stored quickly at low cost, and could act as a insurance policy against rapid loss of the world gene pool. And the DNA bank could be used in the molecular phylogenetic and systematics of extinct taxa and genes that can be distributed via the polypeptide chain reaction, and using primer supply by the users. And the DNA sample have been mainly used for bioprospecting, okay, and assessment of biodiversity study. And gene bank it, its use in the conservation is limited, as whole plant can not be reconstituted from DNA, but the genetic material can be introduced to other genotypes for plant breeding and enhancement purpose. Okay? Like the development of resistance, development of drought resistance, development of flood resistance, plant. Okay, okay. So these are some of the ways by which we have to improve the plant and develop a hybrid plant. Okay, this is the references. So now we have to summarize the content. Okay, so today we have to discuss about the conservation of forest, various ways of conservation of forest, okay, and the deforestation, and causes of deforestation, and the control measure of deforestation, okay, and the uses of forest resources, okay, and what is the importance of forest resources, significance of forest resources, okay, and what are the common reasons for the large scale depletion of forest, and adverse effect of depletion of trees or forest, and the conservation way of forest, and importance of biodiversity or biological diversity, and cause of loss of biodiversity, okay, and conservation strategy for the biodiversity. Okay, so the two major method today we have to discuss, in situ and ex situ. Okay, like protected area, biosphere reserve, national park, okay, wildlife sanctuary, and ex situ conservation like gene sanctuary, seed gene bank, field gene bank, pollen bank, DNA bank. Okay, these are the points which we have to discuss today. Now, quiz. So the diverse flora and fauna of the planet are under great threat, mainly due to, okay. So the main reason is sensitivity to our environment. Okay. So the option C is correct. So which one of the following is endangered species of Manipur? Okay. So if we talk about the Manipur reference, so the Sangai, okay, grow enter deer is endangered species. and which one of the following is located in West Bengal? Okay, so in West Bengal, so the Sundarbans National Park is located in West Bengal. So option B is correct. And which one of the following state has the largest area under permanent forest? Okay, so Madhya Pradesh has largest area under permanent forest. So option D is correct. Which one of the following conservation strategy do not directly involve community participation? Okay. So the demarcation of wildlife sanctuary, okay, cannot directly involve the community participation, but the joint forest management, bees bachao andolan, chipko movement is directly involve community participation. So option D is correct. Okay. So thank you everyone.